Most manipulative people never tell you exactly what they mean, and that's not an accident. In fact, some of them depend on you never asking for clarification, because the moment they're forced to explain themselves, something interesting happens. The advantage they had begins to disappear. The conversation changes. The confidence they seemed to have moments ago starts to fade, and sometimes they become surprisingly uncomfortable, all because of a single question. A question so simple that most people overlook it. Yet it has a way of exposing what vague comments, hidden intentions, and manipulative tactics depend on most. And once you understand why it works, you'll start noticing something you may have missed for years. Many forms of manipulation aren't powered by what is said. They're powered by what remains unclear. Most people imagine manipulation as something obvious, a lie, a threat, a direct attempt to control someone. But some of the most effective manipulation is much harder to spot, because it doesn't rely on making a clear statement. It relies on avoiding one. Imagine someone says, "Wow, that's an interesting choice." What exactly does that mean? Are they impressed, judging you, being sarcastic, expressing concern? You don't know. And that's where the advantage comes from. The less specific a statement is, the more room it creates for interpretation. And once that happens, something predictable occurs. The other person starts filling in the blanks. They begin guessing, explaining, defending themselves against meanings that were never explicitly stated. Without realizing it, they've shifted their attention away from what was said and onto what might have been meant. And that's a powerful position to be in. Because as long as something remains unclear, the person who created the ambiguity rarely has to explain themselves. Everyone else does. This is where most people accidentally make things worse. The moment a vague comment makes them uncomfortable, they react. They explain themselves, try to correct the impression that was created. And on the surface, that seems reasonable. After all, if someone implies something unfair, shouldn't you clear it up? The problem is that the moment you begin defending yourself, the focus shifts. You're no longer examining what they said. You're explaining why it isn't true. Meanwhile, the person who made the original remark still hasn't explained what they meant. And that's often where manipulation becomes effective. Not because they've proven anything, but because they've managed to put you in a position where you feel the need to justify yourself. And that's exactly why a simple question can be so powerful, because it removes ambiguity. The question is, what do you mean by that? That's it. No anger, no sarcasm, no attempt to prove the other person wrong, just a request for clarification. And while that may sound almost too simple to matter, pay attention to what happens next. A few seconds ago, they were directing the conversation. Now they're being asked to explain themselves. Now they have to decide whether they're willing to say explicitly what they only implied moments ago. And that's where many manipulative people become uncomfortable, because ambiguity gave them flexibility. Clarity takes it away. A vague remark can mean almost anything. A specific statement cannot. Once someone clearly explains what they mean, their intentions become much easier to evaluate. But the most useful information often isn't in the original comment. It's in the response they give after being asked to clarify. Because when someone hears, "What do you mean by that?" they usually respond in one of two ways. The first is simple. They explain themselves. They clarify what they meant. The conversation becomes clearer. No problem. But the second response is more revealing. Instead of becoming clearer, they become evasive. They avoid the question, change the subject, act as though you're being unreasonable for asking, or insist that you're taking things too seriously. And that's worth paying attention to, because people with honest intentions generally don't fear clarification. People relying on ambiguity often do. Imagine someone says, "People have been talking about you." Most people immediately react. What are they saying? Who said it? That's not true. But try asking, what exactly do you mean by that? Now the burden shifts. Now they have to explain what they actually know. And sometimes that's where the conversation falls apart, because there was never much substance behind the statement to begin with. Or imagine someone says, "I guess some people just don't care." It's vague, it's indirect, it's designed to create a reaction. Instead of defending yourself, ask, "What do you mean by that?" Suddenly they have a choice: be direct or retreat. Either way, the ambiguity starts disappearing. And that's why this question works in so many situations. Not because it wins arguments, not because it exposes every manipulative person, but because it prevents you from reacting to assumptions. It encourages clarity before conclusions. One of the easiest ways to understand a person's intentions is to pay attention to how they respond when asked to explain them. Some people welcome clarity, others avoid it, and that difference can tell you a great deal. Before you leave, think about this. Have you ever asked someone to explain what they meant and watched the entire tone of the conversation change? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes the fastest way to understand a person's motives is simply to ask them to make those motives clear.